So in my last video I said I'd show how the data mapper worked in my modeling system, and since then I've actually written some more generation code that writes a basic data mapper for you. You still have to do, you'll probably have to do some work depending on how your system works, but if you have all basic properties that all basic models that all have an ID property and that's their only primary key, and have no foreign keys, it might work without any tweaking. So I'm just going to start over real quick and create a new project, and then we'll go ahead and create a model, and again I'll just call it user. And you can see it generated a couple new files this time, and then also I'm going to create a couple properties on that. First we'll give the user an ID and also give them a username, and that'll be fine for now. So let's take a look at the code. So the actual model file hasn't changed, just has the getters and setters. The DB table file is a little bit different because now it extends a custom DB table that I've written, and we can look at that code in a minute. The data mapper. Okay, so the data mapper has some pre-written code, and the reason that I didn't do this in the parent class is that you really are going to have to write this code yourself, but this is a good starting point. So the fetch all method basically grabs your data access object and tells the data access object to fetch all of the data, and then passes that to a collection class, which is just an array wrapper for user entities. And the only reason that I use this is then you can do some code hinting on it, and you can check to make sure that your other methods are getting past a user collection rather than just an array of who knows what. The fetch by primary is very similar. You just grab your data access object and tell the data access object to fetch by primary, and this is a method that is in my custom DB table. So if you're just using a database, this will work by default. If there's no object, if there's no data for that primary key, it returns false. Otherwise, it returns a new user entity and populates it with that data. Save just pulls the data out of the entity, and actually this has been renamed. I have to oops, I have to change that in the code generation file. It grabs an array of the entity's properties, and then just passes that to the data access object. And again, if you're using my custom DB table, that will work by default. The save method sorts out whether you're trying to insert or update based on your primary keys. Delete grabs the entity's ID. By default, the code assumes that the ID is just a property called ID. Anything that has multiple column IDs or multiple column primary keys rather, or anything a little bit fancier, you're going to have to tweak this. And then that just passes it on to the next method, which then just passes that primary key onto your data access object. Collections, very straightforward. It's all handled in the parent class. This is just here so that you have that code hinting and everything. And the form has been unchanged. So I'm going to pause this for a second. I'm going to copy my Galahad library into this demos library folder, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I just threw a copy of the Galahad framework extension in here. And I'll just go over quickly some of the code. So the DB table extends Zen DB table, but it has a couple helper methods in here. So save, basically it it runs through your primary key or primary keys and checks to see if they exist in the data. If they do exist, then it does an update with a where statement on those keys. If they don't exist, it doesn't insert. The fetch by primary basically just passes the primary key onto the DB table's find method, but because of the way that method works, I had to write a wrapper for it. And it also returns an array rather than a DB table row set. The delete by primary, is pretty straightforward. Just grabs the primary key, turns it into a where statement, and passes it on to the delete. And so these are just there to make your life a little bit easier. The data mapper itself, is there anything interesting in here? Not particularly. And the collection is really just a wrapper for an array. So it takes some entities or an array, and then it implements iterator, array access, and countable. The only thing in here that's somewhat noteworthy is this ensure entity method. So basically it'll take an array, and then when you fetch an object out of it, it'll convert it into a model. So this method is what does that, and in a case where you can't just pass data straight into the model, say you have some relationships that you need to build another object for or something like that, you can do that here. You can subclass this and do that here. That's pretty much it. So all this code right here, I don't have it anywhere where I can run it right now. But this code right here, if you did something like, if you created a new data mapper, and then created a new user entity, set some data on it, and hit save, assuming that your database is set up correctly, and you'd have to do that in your Bootstrap, in your config file, most likely. It should save without any work on your part. Obviously, anything more advanced than this very simple example, and you'd have to do a little bit more work, but it's a good starting point. So again, feedback is more than welcome. I'm basically doing these videos so I can get some feedback. My website is cmorrell.com, CMORRELL.com. That's this right here. And you can get my email address over here, or on most of my posts I have a link to my Twitter and whatnot. So definitely feedback, and just let me know what you think. All right, thanks.